I'm so happy to be here and then to share my experience or lessons which I earned from my job career as a president of CATS and the KSA and the testing lab KTC and then university. So for my Koreans, I would like to make my presentation in Korean. So foreigners would like to use interpreter channel 2. 오늘 ISO TC 211 공간 정보
Today, I was present at the preliminary session of today's event to discuss the national standard systems in the geospatial data sphere. And we were able to share the implications of our national systems at today's conference. My presentation can be broken down into 4 parts. First, we will look into the economic growth and standard development and how we came to establish the national standard system in Korea. And third, we will share what experiences and insights Korea has learned from its history. First, I would like to share the economic progress and standard development. In 1970s, Korea's GDP was about $279 billion. This figure jumped to $33 trillion, $59.1 billion in 2022. It's a growth of more than 120 times. In terms of export volume, our exports in 1970 was $840 billion, which grew to $685.6 billion. As you can see on the graph on the slide, you can especially note that after the 2000s, Korea grew rapidly in terms of economic volume, showing you a very steep slope on the graph. Now, when we look at the exports of Korea and how it came to be in today's world, we engrossed $683.58 billion, making Korea rank the 6th place after China, the United States, and so forth. Also, in terms of the numbers of world-class products, Korea only had 120 products from 140 companies, but this figure grew to over 900 products from 1,000 companies, which is about 8-fold growth. Now, what enabled Korea to produce so many world-class products is because we had implemented an export-driven policy. But not only that, we also adopted a standardization strategy that is globally harmonized. In simpler terms, we implemented policies that are friendly to exports. From 1962 to 2000, we developed 10,000 Korean standards. So this is development from scratch to zero base. We mainly borrowed standards from GIS, BS, DIN, which tend to center on the products. But things began to change from 2000 to 2022. The number of KSs grew to 10,000 to 2,000 and more. And we began centering on functions rather than products. One interesting point is that as we have seen in the growth in our exports or GDP, the slope has gone rapidly up. The same applies here as well. after the 2000s, we began developing Korean standards rapidly in a short span of time. As you can see on the graph here in the center, as of 2022, Korea has over 20,000 standards, which is equivalent to the volume of standards at ISO, which is also about half the amount that of the British standards. Especially, Korea considered its own stage in the industrial development and adopted new classification systems in KS. That is in line with ISO and ICS. The active adoption of standards is what made this possible. Now let's look at the international standardization activities of Korea. The NWIPs that we proposed from Korea was 7 in 2001. It grew to 1,234 in 2022. It is a manifest proof that we have begun to yield a greater influence in supporting our businesses all over the world. Korea also has experts actively taking part in global standardization activities, such as secretariat members and conveners. As of last year, we have 250 people who are making various efforts and in implementing Korean standards and international standards. Now we will explore how Korea has established its national standard system. I would like to set this in context. The Korean national standard system was adopted as a strategic tool for economic growth. It was the initial concept which drove Korean government in its initial stages to adopt a national standard system. The government back then decided that our exports products should have a competitive edge. And because of that, Korea focused on petrochemicals, steel, electrical products, shipbuilding, and automobiles as key industries for exports. And in these sectors, Korean government decided that they should have competitiveness in both price and quality through higher productivity, of course. And that drove the government to adopt fine measurement technologies to enhance the high productivity of those products. Realizing the need for measurement standards and the mass production methods that are needed for price competitiveness, Korea implemented these strategies as a way to drive the domestic economy. So standards had such a place in Korea's development policy. Now, there are some reasons why Korea built organizations and systems to introduce Korea's industrial standards. First, we needed an organization that could be in charge of standards. In 1961, that drove the government to set up the Standards Bureau, also to implement standards in the private sector. The Korea Standards Association was set up in 1972. Also, to settle the standard system as a working system, The Industrial Standardization Act and the Metrology Act were enacted in the 1960s. To enact such policies, Korea established development strategies for the KS system and introduced ways to utilize KS. The Korean government thus set up in 1971 the 10-year plan for industrial standardization. And also, it sought ways to utilize standards so that the industrial standards system could take root early on an institutional framework. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, that the KS mark system was adopted in 1963. Moreover, the Industrial Goods Quality Management Act was also enacted in 1967, providing the foundation on which product quality and standards could grow together. Also, we needed people such as quality managers and standardization experts. That's how the government came to implement a training of experts in standards. Now, the framework for national standard system in Korea tends to focus on 4 key areas. First is the enforcement of standard-related laws and organizations, which also looks into the organization and placement of standards. Also, the government boosted the certification system for private businesses and established a standard system. As I explained earlier, we have the Industrial Standardization Act and Industrial Goods Quality Management Act that have been enacted in that spirit. And government organizations and private organizations as well have been established. This is an institutional tool to ensure that we have enhanced quality and also standardization. The Korean government also established medium and long-term standardization plans and addressed technical barriers to trade issues. The government took on a very active role so that the level of national standard system can be heightened. Another aspect of the framework is that the Korean government adopted the conformity assessment system and built up standard infrastructures. Also, to develop the standardization development infrastructure, Korea invested steadily to train experts, acquire budget, and to secure an IT system in place. This is how Korea established a national standards system. That became a driver for our establishment of the system. From 1962 to 1972, we can track the progress in 4 key phases. First is the establishment period, the initial stages. Next is maturity. And then the grade leap, and then the final stage. In the initial stages, authorities that have led experts have been established. They made the first organizations, laws, management systems, and long to mid-term plans, creating the very basic foundation on which the industrial standardization could take place. Next is maturity, which is from 1973 to roughly 1995. by setting up the Industrial Improvement Administration, we supported the economic growth and supported the industry's role in that. As a result, we saw an increased number of standards and specifications. The KS certification system was heightened in status, and we were also able to modernize the facilities. The third phase is from 1996 to 2014. The early authority transformed into the Korean Agency for Technology and Standards. In this period, Korea enacted the Framework Act on National Standards, adopted international standard systems. We also actively participated in international activities for standardization. 2015 and onwards, we have 9 national authorities that are now seeking standardization, which are also looking to expand the realm of standardization across all sectors. Now, the graph you see is what the Korean national standard system looks like. We have industrial standards, committees, and authorities that are in charge of that. And from these experiences that Korea has, we can find implications. First is that we thought that the ideal status was that there should be a constitution as the basis, and then laws on top of that. But as you have seen, Korea was not like that in the initial stages. The order of growth was a little bit mixed up for Korea because we enacted the Metrology Act for consumer transaction first, and then another act for industry later. Later, the Ministry of Commerce and Industry developed the 10-year plan for industry standardization. And later, 5-year plans were established instead of 10-year plans. And afterwards, national standard development plans were established 4 times over in line with Framework Act on National Standards. By actively taking on international standards, we focused on making our own systems global, so that they are in compliance with international systems. In other words, we accepted international standards as our own standards. As a result, 64% of all our standards are compliant with ISO and IEC. 36% have been adopted from other countries, and some are our own standards. Korea is also heavily investing by borrowing loans from ADB and IBRD so that we could establish our own standards. In conclusion, our national standard system has been created to support our exports economy and to support the price and quality competitiveness of Korean products. And it's a success case. As you can see on the graph, the blue line represents the number of standards, and the orange line represents the GDP per capita. You can see how our standards have contributed to the growth of the GDP per capita in Korea. I think there's an insight to be gained in this outcome. Also, I want to emphasize the role of people in standardization because we need great talents. For this end, we have various contests and competitions to inspire a high level of training and education. Standards is a national agenda. It is capable of being one. Korean experience shows you that. By harnessing the technologies of businesses, we have actively participated in creating international standards. Standard is not a document on your table. It's not something written on a paper. It's a valuable tool to address your problems. So when we are making standards, it's in connection with regulations, in making our regulations reasonable. And Korea is about to make great contributions. Thank you.